Thanks to Dan Brettig. Looking forward to the work he will do at the Age. Geoff, we didn't really go into the IPL element of this, but there's been a bit of movement this week as far as the schedule for the competition. 14 days ago, let's say, it was all about trying to get the IPL to England and maybe requiring a reshuffle of the test matches. There was a chance that the Old Trafford test, fifth in the schedule against India, might have got moved to the front, and which would have meant the gap for the Indian players would have been shorter after the World Test Championship final. But that got vetoed essentially by the ECB. The suggestion was there was never a formal pitch made by the BCCI, but nevertheless that was knocked on the head. In turn, the BCCI have done what we expected them to do and scheduled it to be in the UAE, which means that now we have a whole different conversation about how the players might be available, when they might be available, and it looks, Geoff, as though the Australians simply won't be.
Well, there was never a formal request either to change the India-England Test series to accommodate the IPL or to get rid of the fifth Test at Old Trafford to accommodate that. But there were informal requests. And I'd be very curious to know, I think King Cricket was writing about this as well during the week, the distinction between formal and informal requests. I informally requested this hitman to kill a man for me, but I did not formally request it and thus cannot be charged in a court of law. So look, they've settled on this new window without changing the England series, which leaves them not much time to try to squeeze the thing in. And it doesn't look like Australian players will go. England players definitely won't go. But I suppose as long as you get your 30-odd matches on and get them on TV, satisfy the contracts, then that's all that needs to be done. It doesn't really matter who's playing in the end. We saw the Australian players leave hotel quarantine in Sydney yesterday, having, of course, been chartered from India via the Maldives and then through to Sydney. Some lovely shots, especially of Pat Cummins and his pregnant fiancée, embracing at the front of the hotel. It must have been so tough for them, especially. But yeah, all the players having gone through a lot over the last month or so, they're now back in the community. Unfortunately for some of them, they'll be back to Melbourne and back to lockdown in the case of Glenn Maxwell. But at least they've reached that next threshold of exiting hotel quarantine. Yeah, welcome home.
Yeah,
you can't go out. It's a huge amount of time when you think about it, that it's being in a form of lockdown to get into the IPL bubble in the first place, being inside it for a few weeks, then having to spend the best part of a couple of weeks in the Maldives waiting to come home, and then on coming home you're in hotel queue for 2 more weeks. They must have just been tearing their hair out by the end of it, and it's no surprise that a couple of the more prominent players in Dave Warner and Pat Cummins have already said that they don't want to go to the West Indies. They're supposed to be on that trip, which would mean heading to Brisbane in 2 weeks from now. So after spending the best part of a month in staged lockdowns and quarantines on the way to getting back to their own homes, they would have 2 weeks at home and then be off to Queensland. I mean, presumably if you're coming from Victoria, maybe you have to be isolating again to go to Queensland. And then off to the Caribbean, where you also have to spend 14 days in St. Lucia, which has a bit more freedom than other places, but basically you're inside a resort or a large hotel of sorts. And I think you can leave your room and wander around and do things within the complex, but you can't leave the complex. So they'd probably have some arrangement for going to train and so on, but they'd still be in a form of quarantine over there as well before actually being able to get out and play. So it's just a vast amount of this kind of stuff that the players in that squad will have to keep dealing with if they go ahead on that tour.
Yeah, I think if the IPL finished the way they expected to, and sure, they would have had to have quarantined in Australia anyway around this time, but I think it was just the way in which it all came about. It was the detour, it was the sudden way the tournament ended. It's been obviously very taxing on them, having been through a number of bubbles in the Australian summer as well. So it makes sense that there'll be a degree of rest now for those players. And look, we've seen it in England as well. And look, maybe the England players never would have been available from the IPL, for this Test series against New Zealand, which we'll talk about in a bit of depth later in the show. But the fact that there's been this unusual and tragic intervention in India, I think, has changed the thinking around how they have to manage these players carefully as they transition from that and get ready for the next series.
Well, also that the prognosis for things to be easier within Australia is not great. Whereas maybe 6 months ago, players and CA would have been thinking by the sort of latter of, by 3/4 of the way into this year, we should be pretty right. We might not have much in the way of quarantine coming in. We'll have people vaccinated and all the rest of it. Now it's looking like all through the home summer that will still be a factor. So anytime someone leaves the country, they've potentially got 2 weeks in isolated quarantine coming back in. A lot of countries they go to will require that sort of quarantine as well, inbound. So there's a lot more difficulty ahead than might have been anticipated 6 months ago.
Gee, that dog whistling the government's been doing for the anti-vaxxer vote, fuck me, it's going to have massive repercussions through the community and through cricket as well. Geoff, let's do some nerd pledge, I think. Shall we?
A little bit of nerd pledge. A little bit of nerd pledge. That's a game that we play on this show. It's a reverse quiz style game. We play it with people on our Patreon page because in order to spend all the time making the show a couple of times a week, we need to get some funding in, and they help that by sending us amounts of currency, very specific amounts, numbers that relate to cricket in some way, and we have to work out what that relationship is.
We're going to do one number today, Geoff, and this will be a feature of the weekly show as we work through. We've decided to just do one featured number on the weekly show, and we'll have everything else on story time, which is loads of fun, by the way. I always say this on the weekly show, but if you're not part of our story time crew, that is getting better and more detailed and more ridiculous week on week. So be with us there each Saturday morning. Yep. Geoff, the number we have to deal with today is a familiar number. It's a friendly number. It's like an old pair of jeans. And Nick Dempsey has sent through 365, and I'm pretty sure you're going to luxuriate in it.
$3.65. Yeah, 365 is familiar. I like that you said jeans because in a way 365 is related to Brian Lara, who also made the 501, the Levi's 501s. It's a very jeans related number. But in terms of the most iconic numbers in cricket, 99.94, and then probably 365 and 375 would have to be very close to that. 365 being the world record score that Garfield Sobers held, and then 375 what Brian Lara made to break it the first time. Yeah,
I think that's right. I reckon if you were going through, maybe this could be a subtopic for us on a story time at some point. Maybe we should write a book. The best numbers, and I reckon 365, it's on the podium, put it that way.
So as far as the Sobers knock, it's remarkable that that's his first 100 in Test cricket. He's 21 years old when that happens. It's in the same series that Hanif Mohammed made the 337. So 2 triple tons in the same series in 1958. And the 365 that Sobers made, that record stood for 36 years, just a couple of months short of 36.5 years when Brian Lara broke it in 1994. But I think that number's familiar, so maybe that's not where Nick's going. 36.5 did feel like a Shane Robert Watson batting average sort of number. I felt like 36.5 was about where he was in his Test career, but he never specifically landed on 36.5. He was 36.56 after the MCG game in 2013 when he made 83 not out in the 4th innings in a run chase. Very underrated innings, mind you. 83 off 90 balls to chase 220 odd and make sure that Australia won that game. But yeah, 36.56 would be rounded up, not down, so that can't be it. But there are a couple of players who averaged 36.5 overall in their Test career. One of them you might be interested in, Adam, Richard Hutton, the son of Sir Leonard Hutton, who only managed 5 tests. It's the sort of Julian Lennon, Arjun Tendulkar complex. It's hard to be the son of or daughter of someone who is so good, so prominent, and so dominant in their field. But did play 5 Test matches, more of a bowler than a batsman. Took 750 odd professional wickets. Did Richard Hutton. And took 9 wickets in tests and made 2 half centuries, top of 81, could bat a bit obviously, and did average 36.5. But it's also an interesting pairing considering who we like on this show. Shahid Afridi from 27 Test matches and Shardul Thakur, current final word favourite, from his 2 Test matches, currently averaging 36.5. I know you enjoyed Shardul's work at the Gabba.
Very much so. I really hope he gets a chance to play. The fact that they've got so many fast bowlers here, we forget that sort of Shardul Thakur, Mohammad Siraj, they were the replacements. Despite having done so well, they will probably slip behind Ishant Sharma, obviously Jasprit Bumrah, Mohammad Shami back at full fitness. So it might be the case that Shardul comes here and doesn't play, but I hope there's a way they can shoe him in because he's a super bowler.
Will Bhuvneshwar come to England as well?
No, he's not playing the Test matches. So
Right.
I think that the issue with Bhuvi, despite how well he would do here, it's just that his body doesn't let him play more than sort of one 4-day game in a row. So, and that's been an issue for a couple of years now. So he's become almost, despite what it looks like, he's almost become a white ball specialist. Anyway, not to worry. Return to 365.
If you could only play one test, it'd be pretty handy for that to be the World Test Championship.
That's
final.
true. That's
just saying. A guy who can swing it around corners, be pretty useful. So Shahid Afridi and Shardul Thakur both had an aggressive intent with the bat. What I really liked looking at Afridi's record, though, is the Test batting strike rate of 86.97. Which doesn't sound super high in the T20 era, but as far as a Test career average, it's pretty fucking high. In terms of players with higher strike rates across their career, there are a handful ahead of him with very unclear stats from the eras when they didn't consistently keep records of balls faced, so they're not reliable. And then there are a handful of other players with clear stats, but the most number of deliveries that any of them faced was 159. So Afridi faced nearly 2,000 balls across 48 innings. He is clearly far and away the only established player with a strike rate that high across the ridiculous career that he had.
I've realised recently that we think of stats being quite thorough in the modern era. But if you go on James Anderson's Crick Info page, which I do from time to time, it must be said, he doesn't have a career first-class economy rate. And I think a career first-class batting strike rate either, because there must have been games towards the start when, for whatever reason, balls faced weren't kept, which seems crazy now that in the last 20-odd years there were games like that. But yes, Shahid Afridi, there was a clip that went around, I think a Rob Belinda clip that went around, did the rounds again last week from his final Test innings when he was caught in front of the grandstand there at Lords by Mike Hussey off the bowling of Marcus North. It was an appropriate way for him to fall, trying to pop him onto the moon, pop him up to Abbey Road or something like that. But no, the strike rate of 86.97, it was such an exciting career when he did get going. I think he made 5 Test hundreds, something like that.
Yep, spot on, 5 Test hundreds, and he popped up on the cable TV the other day. They were replaying a bunch of old matches from the mid-90s, old one-day games, and Shahid Afridi, a very young version, was opening the batting and, doing what he does, made 36 off 20 balls or whatever it was and got himself out. But as far as his Test career goes, the 5 tons include him making 103 from 80 balls in Lahore, 122 from 95 in Bridgetown, and 156 from 128 in Faisalabad. And this is part of a streak. 2 of those tons are against India. And there's a streak in less than a year where he makes those 300s. He also makes 59 from 59, 58 from 34, and then 60 from 46, all against India within about 10 months, including, then he makes a 92 from 85 against England. So across 7 innings in under a year, he hits 36s. Along with 68 fours in Test cricket in the space of 10 months. It is an absolutely bonkers career that Shahid Afridi had, even in that year alone, if you leave out the other 30-odd years of him being ridiculous.
Shahid Afridi, what a guy. Thank you, Nick Dempsey, for your 365. And as I mentioned before, there'll be a lot more where that came from on Storytime this weekend. Let's take a break on the final word. When we come back, we'll talk Afghanistan, the county championship, and the Test match starting at Lords this week. Geoff, it's been a couple of weeks. I've got the urge to talk about the most beautiful piece of satellite technology in the cosmos, including the 2 black holes. It is the ZOLEO.
ZOLEO. You put those letters together, you get ZOLEO. Now, Adam, in 1947, the Norwegian ethnographer Thor Heyerdahl set off from the coast of South America on a raft, hoping to reach Tahiti and thus prove that migration had happened from the South American continent to the Pacific Islands. He made it. But in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, had Thor Heyerdahl thought, I'd really like to send a text message to somebody in 1947, he wouldn't have been able to do it. Message in a bottle was the best that you could do at that time. But if you found yourself on a raft in the middle of the Pacific Ocean today, with your smartphone and your ZOLEO box, you could use the ZOLEO to text anyone in the world with a phone number or an email address to send them a written message just from your smartphone. And by the ZOLEO box, I mean a neat little box that fits in the palm of your hand, very lightweight, very durable, very rugged, very well protected and ready for the outdoors, that magically turns your phone into a satellite phone.
I thought about it a lot this week. I got the train back and forth from Manchester, and as you know, Geoff, good luck getting on the Wi-Fi on those trains. So in order to do any work or to communicate with the outside world, it wasn't going to happen. So I thought to myself, how much easier would life be right now if I had a ZOLEO in my top pocket or connected to my belt, as is the custom with the ZOLEO. You can connect it to your belt. And I would have done exactly that, but I'm not in Australia, and thus I haven't actually got a ZOLEO yet, and I will when I get back there later in the year. You do, though. You've got it in your hand right now. It looks so small. It looks so compact. It's so effective. It's so efficient.
So neat.
It's so neat. It's just, it's elegant. It's perfect.
Check out that belt loop. You could just pop that straight on your belt like that. That nice little loop.
That's it.
You could put it on your keys if you had a big set of keys. You could just be a big key ring, big durable key ring. So, as Adam said, you don't have to be in the middle of the Pacific. You could just be maybe halfway between Crewe and Manchester when it's equally impossible to get a message out. You could bang on your ZOLEO, open up the little app on your phone, and you can text whoever you want.
Remember that night?
Anywhere,
remember that night
anytime.
in the World Cup when we were coming back from Manchester on that, when we were leaving Pakistan, India, and we had to get back to London on the last train. I mean, we might have been booked on the penultimate train, and we had to get back because we were doing the Yahoo show the following morning. There was no latitude there. There was no way to make it work unless we returned home that night. And what were we were sending something off. And, of course, the Wi-Fi wasn't working. The 4G wasn't letting us do it from the train. I had to get off a train, run into a pub where I just, in the nick of time, got it sent via the pub's free Wi-Fi, sprinted back, got on the next train. I think I was in Macclesfield or something like that. Does that ring a bell?
Yep.
And it was a very stressful experience. It took years off my life, but I wouldn't have needed to necessarily have worried about that. I could have maybe sent a message from the ZOLEO saying to the people in question, it's going to come, it's just going to be a while. And I'm sure there'll be a time when the ZOLEO can let you send files too. For the time being, it's just sending messages, but you get a sense of the direction this technology is going in.
But if you had to file an article, say, you could do that. There's no reason you can't send 1,000 words on the ZOLEO.
Exactly.
You could file a text piece from anywhere on the planet to anywhere on the planet. That's what it does. Anybody, anywhere can use it anytime. It's magic, and it also has an SOS function so that if you get lost, if your raft is sinking, you hit the SOS button, it goes straight to an emergency response triage centre, I think based in the USA, and they work out where you are and they contact local emergency response authorities and send them to rescue you. So, invaluable, ZOLEO.com. Check it out.